Hey everyone, in this episode, veteran startup CTO Michael Raybman does a good amount of show and tell of some of the latest and greatest AI coding tools that he's using. Now, if you're thinking, is this yet another AI replacing engineers conversation? I can assure you it's not. My biggest takeaway from this conversation with Michael was actually knowing when to use AI and when not to. And if you're especially a non-technical founder of a startup, you don't want to miss this one. Michael, good morning. I'm so excited to have you on this podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, Vidya. Good. Good to be here. Bright, sunny day in San Francisco. Excited to be on.
That's awesome. Well, why don't you start by giving everyone an introduction about yourself?
Sure. I am a software engineer. I like to always introduce myself that way. That's the core of what I do. I used to run a company earlier in my career. And then after that company, wanted to expand my skill set, ended up working in senior technology leadership roles for startups in Boston. That was an awesome learning experience. I sort of started building up a lot of reps, just getting projects from start to some meaningful team and revenue milestones, and came across a really interesting opportunity with a venture capital fund where they basically wanted to bring that capability in-house, where I would be the internal expert helping their portfolio companies troubleshoot, hire, build teams, build products. That company was Hustle Fund. And so at Hustle Fund, I had this incredible exposure to a ton of founders just building and kind of jumping in and out of problems as they arose. So that was a really unique experience. I got to see a lot of patterns and anti-patterns and just really loved doing that. So after Hustle Fund, I basically started a practice doing this on my own. And so what I've been doing for the past few years is joining early stage technology companies for somewhere between 3 months to 2 years in some cases, and helping them get to a substantial milestone in their engineering and product development.
Wow, that is fascinating. I'm sure it takes a very high degree of technical competence to be able to straddle such a broad spectrum of engagements that you seem to be doing, all the way from very, very early stage, doing it for a few months, all the way up to a few years. And in your experience, Michael, do you work much at all with non-technical founders?
Quite a lot. Yeah, it's very much breadth first, I would say. So I do a lot of work on a lot of different problems. And the most important thing is having the right people in the right place and being able to kind of make them productive. And non-technical founders typically don't have that pattern recognition built up of how to have a high functioning engineering team. So that has been a big chunk of what I do.
It's fascinating that we are talking about non-technical founders in June 2025, right? I mean, obviously this conversation would have made sense even 5 years ago, this difference between technical and non-technical founders and what each of them brings to the table, but especially in the era of vibe coding and where every week there is a new announcement that we are seeing. It's actually very interesting. In that context, I'm just curious to know, as you think about hiring a developer, what do you think is the actual canonical path in 2025 to be able to get from idea to product? I'd imagine your response from 5 years ago is going to be very different from what you're going to say today, but I just wanted to throw it out there and get your reaction.
It really changed. There's a lot of memes out there about this right now. Like there's the meme of all of the professional software engineers just dunking on non-technical co-founders, basically trying to vibe code the way to their first app. But I think it's gotten to the point where my advice has changed. So I used to say to a non-technical person that they should just sell their product however they can and then try to get an engineer to build their first MVP. I still think that's basically the way to go, except the headway you can make with tools like Bolt and Lovable with very little technical ability just to present to a customer what is the experience that you're imagining has really matured. So can you go from production or from scratch to, production, revenue generating, full stack web app as a never before coded kind of person? Probably not in all cases, although I can see some people learning it very quickly. But can you get it to a point where you can have a very compelling functional mock-up of your product that's maybe even connected to some data and maybe even can take some initial orders? Absolutely. And I think if you can do that successfully as a non-technical co-founder, it actually makes your ability to make progress very appealing to an engineer to join you down the line. and move your effort further along.
That is so interesting and insightful at the same time. And you mentioned a few important things. And as I parse through what you were saying, Michael, the first thing I heard was, the non-technical co-founders should be able to sell their product before they built anything. And I'm glad to hear that, because that is one thing that hasn't changed. You might remember, we were talking about Concierge MVP from like 10, 15 years ago, even 5 years ago. It looks like you still stand behind that. So no matter what, selling is important, and especially that stable stakes if you're a non-technical founder. So that piece stays the same. But at the same time, you mentioned that as a non-technical co-founder, with some of the tools that we have available today, you should be able to, even if not get all the way to production, and let's put a pin on production and maybe come back to it later. But you mentioned that being able to get from that idea to prototype and actually making a sale and hiring a developer is something that's gotten a lot easier for a non-technical founder. So that's a big deal, I would think. As a non-technical co-founder, they can go a long way. And curious to know, are there specific, is there an example that comes to mind? Anything that you can tell, show along those lines?
Absolutely. And maybe we can actually do a little live demo in a second, of how you might go from I have a thought to I have something tangible, and just to show people how incredibly quickly that can happen.
I think that would be really cool.
Let's do one. I just had a thought also Sam Altman, he recently tweeted that it was phrased in a very Sam Altman way. I think he said that if you don't skill max with O3 3 hours a day, you're not going to make it, which is, a certain way to put it, but he's kind of, there's a lot of wisdom in that, because if you actually wanted to make progress as a non-technical co-founder in the past, or just founder, you needed to maybe take a class, maybe take a boot camp, maybe do all these things, and it would be tons of money and lots of time, and your skill at the end of it would not be anywhere near what a professional software engineer is, which is why I used to never really recommend that path to people. So I have a friend named Vish. He used to be a product manager at LinkedIn. Now he's out building a startup. He is not a coder. He's a very talented marketing and branding guy. But when I call him now, we basically have software engineering conversations. He has been able to teach himself how to code to a reasonable degree, purely based on just getting ChatGPT to teach him. Not everybody should follow that road, but the fact that that road is open, the access that it gives to the number of people that can actually build now, it's growing, it's going to grow exponentially. So that's particularly exciting to me. How do you activate that many people to be constructive builders outside of the sort of traditional corporate hierarchy, maybe?
Yeah, that's a great example. I used to be a PM too for a very, very, very long time in my career. And I think the power of these tools, especially in the hands of a PM who has a very good pulse on the needs and customers and things like that, it could be I would think that it might make the role of a PM a lot more impactful in any organization, not just a startup. Anyway, we can come back to that later. But you said you were going to show something. I can't wait to see.
Yeah, let's take a look. So let's just use the most traditional kind of hello world example of we want to build a to-do list. And I'm going to just go to Figma Marketplace to save us a little bit of time. And apparently this designer right here made a to-do list component right here. So I just want to turn that into an app, or turn it into something that is actually live and I can play with. So let's grab this Figma real quick. Here we go. And so Figma now has MCP integration with AI models, which means that if in the past you might need to take a screenshot of that and kind of let an AI model figure out what all these components are, now it can actually be told in a structured way what all the elements, colors, blocks of this constitute. And so we'll go to Bolt. Bolt is one of my favorite app builders. There's many, many great ones. They all have strengths and weaknesses. I like Bolt because it just has a really tight integration with GitHub, and it's very easy for me to take over the code once I'm done. So what I'll do is I'll say, build a to-do list application. Add a basic navigation bar and simple. I tried this before we recorded this. I'm curious if I get something different this time. So I'll just paste this.
You pasting the Figma component here. along with
Correct.
that
But
instruction.
they actually have this Figma integration built in pretty well. And now we're going to wait for it to generate some code.
And is this doing it all locally or remotely?
This is all in the
server?
cloud. They basically set up a web container which can be deployed, can show you a preview of what can be deployed to Vercel, typically in their case, or we can actually take over the code ourselves, as we'll see in a second. So here we go. We just basically copied this design. Now, let's see if I can make my screen a touch smaller. Let me know if it's too small. Is this
perfect.
okay?
Yep.
Okay. So we have this basically design built because it looks like it took the CSS and HTML, but these are not really interactive. So what I will do is, for the moment,
one is dark scheme and the other is not. Like, is there a reason why it's giving us both?
Yes, because we just gave it. It's basically building exactly what is on the Figma page that we gave it.
Okay. Yep.
And so maybe you can imagine in a real life situation, maybe I would go to Upwork and I would hire a designer for a pretty affordable budget to go build me a simple Figma of this app. Like, you can probably have something generated of this quality for less than a couple $100. Obviously, maybe a little more for something more fleshed out. Then I would put this here. And what's cool with the new MCP integration is that Bolt can interact with these components in the same way that a developer might interact with Figma in dev mode. In other words, it can actually introspect all of the elements. So because of that, we can now keep building on top of this. So what we'll say is the check, we'll say turn all the checkboxes into interactive component and remove the light colored one, remove the broken logo, and add a placeholder navigation bar. How about this? So in this online builder, I'll just play. I would normally play around until I get something of a semblance of what I'm trying to get close to. And you could just deploy it from here and turn it into a web page and go from there. So we'll show that in a second. But we could also use this to kick off our own engineering effort. So once this is done generating, we'll explore both of these paths.
I think this is a great example to show how far a non-technical co-founder can go.
There we go. Look at that. We now have a bit of a functioning application with JavaScript. It's got a little progress bar, which is cool. We got our navigation bar. So I'm going to, if I click deploy, it's going to basically provision a container and then publish it. So maybe if I'm trying to sell the world's simplest to-do list to a customer, I can just copy paste this link. And here we go. I can now walk around. I don't think it made the search functional, but we could that would be, for example, the next prompt as we would make the search functional. But as you can see, we're looking at this is not a mock-up. This is a JavaScript app that's running with a server. All of the sort of building blocks are in place. But I do happen to be a software engineer, so I actually want to keep building this on my own. So how about we take a look at how that would look like next?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I would do is I am going to connect it to GitHub. And because you and I are doing this in real time, I actually don't have a repo for this. So we're going to do Unicorn, which is going to be our new repo. And I should probably mention,
this would be the first ever to-do list based unicorn, by the way.
Why not?
Yeah.
But that's a funny point.
I know. Have to check the stock sticker to-do, whether it's available or not. Oh my God. That actually should have been one of the first things that a non-technical founder should have done, I'd say.
And that can be an agentic task. We can just have it scan for those. I think Dharmesh built something like that recently.
There you go.
Okay. So we just sent it to a repo on our GitHub. So go to my GitHub now. And then Unicorn, there it is. Okay. So now with literally no effort and really no application of technical understanding, I have a repo which I could share with a developer. I could code on. I could do pretty much whatever I like. And so something that now you can do to kind of continue remaining a human in the loop of AI contributors, I can actually use codecs from my ChatGPT to interact and add features to it.
So let me ask you a question. Mm-hmm. So if you go back to the Bolt interface and what, as a non-technical co-founder, might be one of the first few things they do in the workflow. At what point do you think it would make sense to jump into the code? Like, obviously, when you're trying to hand it off to a developer is one obvious thing. But even before that, what are some reasons you might want to jump directly into code and into GitHub?
I would say from a non-technical co-founder perspective, if we just keep that hat on for now, the pretty much the only reason to do it would be to make point changes that might be either too costly in terms of token usage to do here, or things where the AI might need to generate something and you don't actually want it to generate, you want it to use like an exact piece of copy, for example. So if we wanted to, or very simple changes, like if we wanted to change the color, the background color, yes, you can prompt for that, but it is a little bit, it's generative by nature, so you don't necessarily 100% know what you're getting, and it will be much easier to go in and make that update. Now, navigating a code base isn't, it can be learned quite quickly, but it's not necessarily the absolute simplest task that you can do if you've never looked at code before. I'd say an average, tech product manager certainly would have no trouble, but not everyone. And so you could use ChatGPT to educate yourself and do that, but expect it to be a little bit of a process. But I do think that once you're starting to really have a somewhat mature form of the project you're targeting, then actually going to the code and making those simple one-line changes for a non-technical person is the right way to go.
I do, want to point out that your perspective is coming from based on your experience, right? As someone who started in software engineering and is super comfortable with code. I'd imagine for like the technical product managers that you mentioned, that may not be impossible or too hard, but I'd imagine for someone, let's say coming from a complete sales and marketing background, it may not be as easy. So I guess, for the second kind of persona where they may not have spent much of their life at all in code, can you think of a point as part of this workflow or development of prototype when they should actually start thinking about hiring someone? Or, would you still think that, hiring is not the first thing they should do? Maybe it's an agency, contractor, that sort of thing.
There's a few paths there. If we take on a solo builder persona, and we could look at, if we're not looking at a venture funded company, let's say you're literally starting from scratch and maybe you have some capital, maybe not, but you're really looking to just get something going. It's always helpful to think about your context, your priorities, and your outputs, and almost future-proofing your thinking in that whether an AI or whether a human does it is actually the secondary question. That's sort of the tools of the job. The most important question is, what do you want to get done? So if you're able to, from scratch, just get to a prototype that roughly demonstrates your intent and you feel like you could go sell with that prototype, then great. You don't necessarily need a technical contributor. Now, from there, let's just imagine that we build this to-do list and then we want to start building things that are a little bit more complex, like login systems, assignments, payments, all this kinds of stuff. The right way to think about it at stage 0.1, I think, is you basically are hiring a pair of coders, one of whom is a human and one of whom is an AI. So the person to hire in that case is somebody who is an engineer who is very comfortable with these AI tools, who will extend or leverage their bandwidth and their ability to get more done for you. Typically, I suggest that should be an individual, whether it's a contract or you hire someone full time, that's kind of secondary. I think in today's shape of the labor force, I don't think it matters in particular. But what is important is that your speed of updating your context matches who it is you're working with. With agencies or dev shops, what I see quite a lot is, you might have understanding that gets updated 3 times a day or twice a week, maybe because you're talking to customers quite a lot. With agencies, there's layers of management. There's all these processes that are really built for larger, later stage projects. And it's very difficult for them to catch up. So even though there's great engineers that work for those shops, it would be very hard for them to be effective for you because they just can't move as fast as your learning is moving. So that's my mental map of those. If, for example, you've talked to your customers to such a degree that you have an incredibly clear, almost like a waterfall level, meaning very, very locked down set of requirements, and you know exactly what needs to happen. It's quite substantial. Maybe it's a few months of work, and you just need to get it done. But you've never yourself hired or retained and managed an engineering team, and so you kind of want to outsource that skill set, then a dev shop or an agency might be a reasonable partner to bring in with that spec locked in and just get them to execute it.
Gotcha. So I think a few important things. In 2025, as we're speaking about this, you still think that it is important to have a real human, whether they're aided by, ideally also aided by AI, helping develop the code, iterate and whatnot. And then whether you go contract work off of to an agency contract or bring someone in-house, that looks like it's a function of how well thought out the scope is for what they're trying to build. At least the first few iterations of that.
That's exactly right.
And in that context, Michael, also, what does good infrastructure looks like for a seed stage startup?
I would say for infrastructure, it's better to keep things simple. It's almost like an art of what not to do rather than what to do, because there is a variety of tools and solutions and options, and they can be quite attractive to a lot of developers. Maybe a developer had an incredible experience with a particular tool and they kind of want to bring it to their next thing. I personally find that unless you have a really strong argument to not use the canonical stack, you should basically not do it. So almost every good architecture I see from a simple early stage implementation is Node with Next or Nest, Postgres, Supabase, Python, Fast API, your basics like Sentry for logging, maybe some uptime monitoring, obviously GitHub Actions. GCP is becoming kind of replacing AWS as the default hosting platform for startups right now, in addition to Vercel obviously making gains. But GCP is kind of like the meat and potatoes host. Like if in doubt, I would probably just host on that. If you really are looking for something that's not that, then I would ask a really strong question of why. And I honestly hear very, very few truly compelling answers.
That is very cool. But thank you for sharing. I'm sure that in and of itself could be a cheat sheet for non-technical founders looking to hire developers.
Definitely. And it's actually a good, I think it's not a bad sort of interview question to be asking at this phase. Like a developer who is the right partner for this stage is usually very pragmatic, and they will usually recommend something along those lines. If you hear a lot of like really latest and greatest tools, then it's probably not the right partner for an early stage non-technical founder.
Makes a lot of sense.
Okay, let me share my screen here.
And then you were sharing with us the app, the to-do list unicorn app that you had started spinning up using Bolt. And then you started getting us into GitHub code. And walk us through what that experience would look like, I guess, before a non-technical founder can take it off to a customer, maybe hand it off to a developer.
Well, this is actually, I think a handoff is exactly, it's a very cool part of it. So what we can do, this is the GitHub repo that we just built. And as we saw, I needed virtually zero technical skill to be able to operate it up to this point. So what's cool is with OpenAI Codex, I can actually interact with this repo from my ChatGPT, and you could do it with yours. So I'm going to quickly spin up an environment for this. What I'm doing right now is I'm basically informing OpenAI that, first of all, giving it access to this repository that we just created, and then spinning up a quick container for this to-do unicorn app that we just built. We'll gloss over some of the environment variables, but the point is that I could basically create a pretty comprehensive development environment for this if I really wanted to. So there we go. We just made it. And so what I can do now, if I go to Codex, this is basically my ChatGPT window.
Sorry, can I interrupt you, Michael?
Yes.
Because you also told me maybe before we started recording this that obviously Bolt also allows you to deploy it in Replit or other such Vercel or other such platforms. Why would someone want to do this with OpenAI Codex versus do it all the way with a bolt?
If you're feeling like what you've built is ready to go, absolutely deploy it. But if we're going to hand it off to a developer, it's better to just turn it into a GitHub repo and then just give your developer access to that GitHub repo. What we're showing here is that GitHub repo basically is becoming this. You can then pivot all of your other AI tools around this repo, right? So you're no longer, even though we started in Bolt today, and I actually used a free account, so we didn't even spend anything. We now have this code base that we can take all the way to production. Like we could conceivably use this code base for the remainder of the lifestyle of this product, add engineers to it, add tasks to it. I could say something like, I would like to add a task assignment capability to this to-do list. Please plan this out for me. It's kind of funny. I always giggle because I say please to AI. I hope that counts in the future. But
well, I'm sure it's costing you some extra tokens.
It really does. I hope it knows it. So we've now initiated what should be a planning mode interaction, where this will now tell me what its plan is for basically implementing that feature. And I can share that with an engineer. And this is a great point to do this handoff. This will run for a while and we can come back to it.
So I noticed, Michael, that you seem to be living here in Codex, or would you think it's ideal to be doing much of everything else for the life of the project, like you said, within Codex, almost as a substitute for living in your IDE? Is that a fair way to characterize it? So is IDE not the central landing page, if you will, for a typical developer in this workflow?
No, not quite yet. This is what we're doing here is very much my sort of non-technical builder hat is on. And we are playing around with what are the different ways to interact with a code base. So for example, if I wanted to, alongside my engineers, say, hey, if I wanted to add this feature to this code base, what would it take? How difficult would it be? I can have it produce an estimation. So this idea of just being able to talk to your code, certainly as an engineer, and we might see that in a second, I have professional uses for that. But as a non-engineer, you can still basically live and breathe very much closer to your code. And if we look at that archetypal role of this slightly technical product manager that I think right now is becoming this core AI builder that can really move mountains with all this tooling, this is probably where they would spend the most of their time.
Got it. Not necessarily the human software engineer that you just hired to your startup.
Correct. And they might use it, they will use it too, but they will use it differently. And we might dive into that a little bit more. But to complete this part of the demo, basically, we now have this implementation plan, basically, that ChatGPT just built for me based on my requirement. And then if I wanted to actually go execute it, it created a task for me. I would click start that task and it would actually create a pull request when it's done in GitHub. Or another really good example, let's say I have an engineer coding, but I wanted to make a small change. Now, without interrupting them, I could just execute this change from here, run this task, but then submit it to them as a PR for review. And so then they could properly look at the code, integrate it in the project as they see fit. And then we're basically collaborating almost on par in the sense that I am doing what's available to me within tooling, and then they're doing what's available to them based on our engineering abilities.
That is very cool. So what did you just start right now?
I just instructed this. I instructed Codex to execute the coding that it suggested it do. So now it's spinning up a container. It's going to write all of this code. And then once that code is ready, it's going to submit it as a PR. So we should be able to see that in a second here. It's adding all the code files.
Codex is pretty new as is. How long have you been using it?
Probably for about three weeks or so, pretty much since it launched, maybe a little bit more now.
And what are your thoughts in general, like in terms of capabilities with Codex versus others that are comparable to Codex?
I haven't really pushed its limits relative to something like Claude Code, for example, or Gemini 2.5 Pro. Like some of them, I find some subtle differences, but they're all, from my uses, are equally capable. So for example, in my own professional use case where I do like maybe I'm running a 10-person engineering team. I'm probably not building, little apps from scratch, but I might still connect to repo and I might say, hey, give me an explanation of a certain process and how it runs in this repo and what are its vulnerabilities, what are its inputs and outputs, right? And so I might basically interrogate a code base that way without it being, if even let's say 8 weeks ago, I would have done that in Windsurf or Cursor, and that interaction would have been limited to my chat inside of that IDE. And now it can just live as part of my kind of main ChatGPT experience, which productivity wise is helpful.
And because you also mentioned Windsurf and Cursor, as we speak now in June 2025, do you have a favorite between them, or is it either of them?
No, I mean, I have to admit that it seems like today, as of June 19, 2025, it looks like Windsurf and Anthropic are going through a little bit of a divorce. So I don't know what you would call it, a separation. They really, that used to be my go-to is Windsurf with Claude 3.7 plus. But now I'm starting to switch more to VS Code and agent mode because they have the most models, and I think their UI was a little bit later to develop, but it's actually getting to be quite good. And I also use Warp in my personal workflow as my
Got it. I think you were very smart to call out the specific date that you're making these claims for. Who knows? Things might change tomorrow.
So here we go. We're looking at some code. We have our diff. It looks like something failed here. We probably don't quite have time to debug it right now, but that would be our next step. But even though it's not quite building, I wanted to show what happens with this integration. So we're going to click view pull request. And here we go. We're right back on GitHub. We have actually a decently well-structured PR with a summary, some basic info. And then I can review it. I can merge it in my code. And what I would do is I would either assign it to Copilot for review, or I would assign it to another engineer that I'm working with. And so in the span of doing this, we literally just discussed an idea, built an initial version of it based on a design, iterated on that a couple times, created a code base, made an update to that code base via PR, and basically are at a place where we could deploy it to production if we wanted to, all from just a few prompts.
This is truly unbelievable how far we've been able to come, and you've been able to come with our Tutu unicorn. Cool. So switching topics, I mean, a big part of what you do in your day-to-day, Michael, is actually getting into existing teams, existing startups, often, unfortunately, broken technical orgs. So in this section, would love to talk a little bit about how you navigated those scenarios, how you troubleshoot those scenarios, and hopefully how you turned them around. So why don't we start with what have you seen as being some early signals that tell you that a team isn't just slow, but is somehow structurally broken?
I've had the opportunity to work with a few teams in the last couple of years that have struggled, and that's becoming, let me just rephrase it. So yes, it's becoming a little bit of a specialty of mine to drop into technical teams where progress has stalled for some reason. A lot of reasons to that, but typically one of the first things you see in a team like that is there's a lot of overwhelm. There's a ton of communication, but that communication is not necessarily super constructive. Lots of discussions over details, but it's unclear what the priority of those details is. People are getting interrupted all day. Lots of kind of a matrix or a lattice of very disorganized lattice of communication that's happening. And if you ask an average contributor, hey, they're going to wake up tomorrow morning, what are they going to work on? Most of them, and why? Most of them will not give you a clear answer. Usually at least half, and usually way more than half. So that's what I typically see in teams like that. There's usually complaints. There's usually, it's this person's fault, or lots of finger pointing flying around. And the reality is, like, by that point, it's no longer any one person's fault. That's just kind of how things developed.
Wow. That sounds extremely messy, but unfortunately, I have been in some of those places myself as an operator. Where would you even start? Like, when you are tasked with taking over such a struggling engineering org, there are so many different places you can start with, right? I mean, there's obviously the process, the communication, the people side that you pointed out. And then there's also code. Unfortunately, some things just can't be changed just by changing people. Where would you start typically?
It's roughly speaking 3 phases, and the mileage really varies on this. But the absolute first thing, and I try to just say as little as I can and just make sure that everyone is listened to. Because a lot of the time when people find themselves in these contentious, unclear situations, egos start flaring up, grievances, maybe old grievances start flaring up. So just going around the team and asking every single person, no matter how high or low in the total poll, what's going on, what are their feelings, making sure that you can articulate back to them that you've actually listened to them. That's usually step 0. That really is true of, I think that's just good basic management, but usually in those teams at that point, it's particularly absent. Then the next phase 2 is looking at how much clarity is there on what actually needs to get built. And the truth is that in every team, whether you're a 2-person startup or you're Microsoft, if you really, really wanted to, you could generate a stacked ranked order of every single, feature item story that has to get built. Like if you had to force a priority on it, you could. Usually that goes all the way to the top, to the senior management of the company, working with them to really commit to this is what the priority of what we need to get built is. And a lot of the time, the truth is they don't know. Startups, it's a feature, not a bug. In startups, it's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
I'll notice that many times that request to prioritize has been pushed to the CTO or to the engineering team. And that's really not what they've been hired to do, right? And so
that's one more feature on their list of unprioritized features.
Exactly. So finding that home for, without blame, who can be accountable for just setting a priority, even if it's a theory hypothesis, that's good enough. Usually that has to go all the way up to the founder, CEO of the company. But once the priority is set, then you can get to work. Okay, we know the target, we know where we need to be. We can assess our current position, and then we can identify how do we walk from current position to that target. And then the step 3 is usually execution has to get reset. Realistically, I think you and I both know that everything has to get built yesterday, if not last week. That's 2 weeks ago would be better. But when you start applying that kind of pressure to a team that's breaking, you actually you usually end up breaking it further down. And you end up with a team that sort of the more pressure you apply, the actually less you get done. So typically in those situations, once I actually step into my operating capacity and start executing, the first thing to do is you just dial back a lot what your horizon is, and you just try to get together and ship something for a day, and then you ship something for a week, and then you just start burning down a little bit of that backlog. And only then you actually really get to the code. Once you have a set of targets, you have a team that's now operating in lockstep, then you can say, okay, look, well, we need to do this, but our legacy infrastructure was tied to this old Amazon Cognito implementation that's out of date. Then you can really have a constructive conversation around that. That's usually the sequence of events that, broad strokes, but applies pretty universally.
That is very, very interesting. A few things that I noticed, the first thing that you started with, or priority 0, as you put it, is actually empathy, which I guess it's both surprising and not so surprising at the same time, right? We're talking about fixing technical orgs, but it most often starts with the non-technical pieces, and it starts with things like empathy. And then you talked about prioritization and forcing priorities and stack ranking, which especially in the case of these startups is really something that people at the very top, at the leadership level, need to own and drive. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to fix things at the ground level. And then I also loved how you talked about really scaling back on the big achievements and goals that the team has been tasked with, and doing more piecemeal, shipping one thing a day or a few things at a time, as opposed to taking on something really big and trying to address it whole. So clearly you have a process here, Michael, that you seem to be, going through rinse and repeat at multiple places that you've been moving up. But one thing that I'm still very curious about is code. I know you're very hands-on with these technical orgs. It's more than just culture and the things that you're fixing. What is your approach to like digesting what can sometimes seem very gnarly mess that is out there? How do you go about it these days?
AI has been really helpful for me to understand the code base. So a lot of the tools that we were looking at earlier are actually some of the same tools that I will use. And it's particularly helpful because I can interrogate not just the code base itself, but I can look at the different PRs and contributions, and I can look at a particular developer's PR history and gain a shortcut to what have they been contributing, what are some basic strengths and weaknesses and what they've been doing. We can actually take a look at some of this right now. Maybe I can pull up a real code base and connect it to Codex and see if it gives us any insight. But that's been a really good way for me to quickly sort of cycle into a team without having to interrupt too much from the devs. And also when I do talk to the devs, I can ask much better questions. I can say, hey, you did this, what was the thinking around that? Or like, what do you think about how this works? Is my understanding correct?
That would be super interesting, especially because you showed us how you use OpenAI Codex for building prototypes and things like that. This is a totally different context.
Let's take a look. So Let's see if I can, this is our to-do list, which our future unicorn to-do list. But if I go back to Codex. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I happen to have an environment set up here this is actually a fairly new build that I'm involved in helping run with the team. So let's just imagine that I'm joining this project for the first time. What I would say is help me understand this code base deeply. Care about file structure, relationships, testing coverage, security, risks and vulnerabilities, API design, middleware, dependencies. Maybe I would say a lot more, but this is like a simple asking it to. Probably by this point, I glanced at the code base myself, and then I would want to have it give me a bit of input. So let's say ask, and now it's running. Plus, what's nice about one of the small but purely product usability reasons I like using ChatGPT Codex for this is I can see the output on my mobile app. So this Codex ask is now running.
Yeah, you can go off and go for lunch, and you'd be getting those notifications on what Codex has done, surfaced, whatnot on your phone while you're still eating lunch.
Exactly. And this is a fairly small code base, but for a large code base, it would take a bit more time. Kind of like basically a way to think about it for folks that have not used this before is just deep research, but kind of feels that way. It feels like a deep research request on a code base. While it's running, another really good example of how I might use a PR, right? And so, for example, if I go to take a look at a recently submitted PR, maybe in a different project. So this is kind of a very brute force way to do this. I can actually select the PR from a Codex menu, but since we're going pretty fast, I can actually just copy paste all of the code from this PR and just dump it in here. And I would say, analyze this PR. I want to see strengths, weaknesses, sorted
That's such
from
a
most
managerial statement.
critical.
Strengths and weaknesses of a PR. Yes. I'm sure it can be used for performance review as well. Just copy all the strengths.
Yes. And so there we go. It's now running as well. So it's going to give me at least a baseline for what are some of the things in this PR that I definitely need to pay attention to. And then when I actually go and do my manual review, I might spotlight
focus on those things. And while this is still going on, let me ask you one more thing. Since you've been using this for a while, what are some use cases where this has not been, there have been some limitations of using Codex, either for understanding code bases or for reviewing PRs?
Certainly. I mean, there's quite a lot. I would say it's still primarily an assistive tool. It's not a replacement for an actual engineer by any means. It can be as trivial as if I'm looking for a particular style in my code base, I want to make sure that a PR matches things, or just in terms of stylistically and logically how things are handled, that they match up to what another developer might have done. It's probably not going to do that out of the box, although it's getting better at this. You can now have an agent's MD file in your code base, which basically tells AI how to process it. But I still do not lean on this as a crutch to be the exclusive reviewer. In most cases, you have to actually read everything yourself, particularly when it comes to layered architectures. There's a limitation to what this can do inside of a container, right? So if a bunch of code files are linked from each other, maybe basic packages that are imported from inside of the code base, it can understand those relationships and maybe call out some obvious bugs. But if there's dependencies on other projects, other containers, it may or may not, and in most cases probably will not, just figure it out of the box. You need a much more complex, dedicated pipeline to be able to debug that in an automated way. You still can use AI for a lot of that, but it's not a quick prompt out of my ChatGPT. So this is really a very modular experience for me for the moment.
So it sounds like for simple code base, it works. For more complex and layered ones, it might miss some things. And yesterday when we were talking about it, you also mentioned one more thing, Michael, which is that sometimes it might call out things which are actually in the big scheme of things don't really matter, especially not in a first pass, right? I think you were talking about things like variable names and things like that. So maybe it just throws everything at you and you have to use your human judgment to know which of the 80-20 that rule to apply.
Exactly. And a lot of the times we actually tell junior engineers, or really any engineer, to move fast because we don't even know if this is a bit of code that we're going to really rely on long term. And maybe to your point, you have a slightly inconsistent variable naming amongst two files. Yes, in theory that should be handled, but those kinds of things, is it important in every single commit at this very early stage? Maybe not. So you have to really apply some judgment on the standard that AI will actually hold your engineers to, as it's kind of, it makes it very simple to focus on low leverage items. And so human judgment is still required.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. And I think I noticed that Codex just completed those 2 tasks, didn't it?
Let's take a look.
And I think you also stopped sharing your screen. Okay. Now it's back on.
So we've got this.
So this is a result of analyzing the code base, right? That's the result of that
task.
That's right. Okay.
So some really good bits here. We've got our dependency, and what's cool is it's actually linking me to the source of the file where this is happening. This tells me a little bit about, this is an implementation detail. That's good for me to know how this developer decided to approach this. Gives me a little bit of, this is maybe not quite how I would love to introspect the schema, so I might interrogate it some more, but it does give me an idea of basically what the data structure is. Tells me basic security implementation. And this is all stuff that I probably would have spent, some time with the code base and figured out. But just knowing it immediately out of the box is helpful, because then I can jump around much more intentionally to actually understand how things work here. There we go. We've got some exception handling. Now I know we've got this WhatsApp integration. So this is a good start, right? And so I would probably from here ask it a bunch more questions, get more in depth, maybe interact with specific code files, ask it, similar to what we did in the past, I would ask it to initiate a plan for how it would make improvements. And so this is kind of a good entry point for me to start grappling with this code base.
Yeah. This is really cool. I mean, it seems like, when you jump into one of these teams, you'll be able to get a ton of know-how, learn it very quickly without having to bother the engineering teams themselves. And you can also figure out like your own set of where you want to prioritize your next week and next month, depending upon the issues that you find from here. Now that
exactly.
I think you also had another flow that you had started. I think it was reviewing a specific PR, if I remember. Do you want to quickly?
It was. So what happened actually, which is kind of funny, is Let me take a look. I don't think it ran correctly. So I just reran this in just playing ChatGPT, which ugly, but actually works in a pinch. I grabbed all the code from there, dropped it right into ChatGPT, and here's my code review. So gives me my
just a few strings. The list of suggestions and potential issues is very long. So if someone was hoping for a good performance review from ChatGPT, bad luck.
Some of these items, though, this is a good example of what we're talking about.
Yeah. Swagger dogs are very repetitive. Yeah. So what?
But maybe you actually want them to be repetitive, right? Yep. In some cases, you want good addition there. No versioning. Obviously, we know this is a new application. There's no versioning in it yet.
Yep.
This is something that I would pay attention to, right? So maybe this is reasonable, but it's actually like, hey, this, if handled incorrectly, this can introduce some long-term technical debt that maybe does not need to be, it can be paid off so cheaply right now. Mm-hmm. But I would never assume that this is the end all be all. It would just, this is smoke, not fire, right? I would go and take a look.
Yep. This is really cool. Thank you for showing this, Michael. I think showing us the first demo gave everyone a good idea, hopefully, as to how far a non-technical founder can go. But this, in the context of what you do when you get into insert yourself into a technical team, is a whole another perspective. And when it comes to actually founders who are trying to rectify mistakes of the past, or are trying to figure out how to go from having a prototype team to a product team that can actually scale, what are some mistakes that you have seen, especially expensive mistakes that such founders have made?
Those could be different at different stages, but one company comes to mind. They put together a fairly comprehensive MVP, which actually used WordPress. And this is fairly recent. It's probably like 3-4 years ago. So they used WordPress to build an initial application and kind of scaffolded some WordPress extensions and some, let's say duct tape kind of stuff. But in their case, they actually skyrocketed to like millions of dollars in revenue off of that prototype.
WordPress. Wow. Okay.
I shouldn't even say prototype.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, because they delivered an awesome product. And so it's a good problem to have. But in that moment, they could have chosen to invest in building a very simple architecture. But instead, they basically said, hey, we don't want to interrupt the service for a second. We want to just scaffold around it. They've run into, over the years, fairly significant issues. They've suffered from substantial downtime. Potentially this could have affected account loss. The company is doing great, but the cost that they had to invest, they way down the line, it was probably well over several $1 million to rebuild their product from scratch. And they kind of, I think, of course, always hindsight is 20/20, but they did miss an opportunity to go back to what we were mentioning earlier, which is be very simple, right? Take a simple web application, build a fast API backend, build a simple Node front end. It probably would have taken them 3 weeks to a month to build it at the time. And it felt like a very long time in the moment, but it would have been easily the kind of fresh start that they needed to prevent a lot of this pain down the line. It can be a bit of an art or a science when to make that trade-off. But one way to think about it is to kind of map that backlog, that stack rank backlog that we talked about, against what you're currently executing, right? So if you have a very clear path to executing that backlog to a large degree from your current position, and you're well aware of the price of it, then that's okay. But if you don't know what the price is, it's always makes sense to find out price in terms of developer time, potential downtime, developer resources, how hard it is to find developers to actually work on something like that. So all of those are factors that kind of play into this calculation.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And in this case, it also sounds like there was also a factor of the unknown unknowns, like how far can a solution that is based on WordPress held together with duct tapes and glue, how far can it take a venture-backed startup? I mean, that's a question which I would have thought, someone even, I don't even want to say technical, but someone who's even a technical product manager would have a very good sense for that. I think it sounds like very unfortunate. Yeah, those are great learnings. All right, we covered a ton of ground here. Want to end this, Michael, with a hot take from you. As I'm sure you've seen, Vertical AI native apps are all the rage these days. Sequoia talked about it, and especially ever since then, all the VCs that I know are only investing in those kinds of startups, and all the founders I know are only talking about building those kinds of startups. From what you've seen, what mix of skill sets do you think makes sense for founders who are getting started along that path?
I might have two hot takes on this. One is,
okay,
I think that it's absolutely right. That's exactly the kind of, there's a huge opportunity in taking what used to be managed services and making them way more scalable because they're AI enabled. But the irony, I think, is that type of execution actually needs VC less to sometimes not at all. So that's my hot take number one, is that yes, that's the way to go, but not because because VCs are excited about it. It's actually because you don't need VCs to execute in that area successfully, for many folks at least.
Wow. That is a steaming hot take. I love it. I love it. I'm all for bootstrapping. If you don't need the money, don't raise it. I love that.
Or at least you can be much more in control of your cap table and when you actually raise.
Absolutely. Mindful about it, right? Yep.
You can do it while you have a full-time job. You can pivot around as much as you want. You can collaborate with a broader range of developers, which brings me to your second question. I think the product manager is making a massive comeback, like the biggest comeback maybe of any technical profession that we've seen. I remember vividly in 2017, 18, it's like the PM is sort of the butt of all jokes because, it's this,
I lived through all that.
You've been there, right?
Yes.
It's the whole management without authority, which started as a management principle, but I feel like it became a punchline. And now, actually, if you look at the skills of a product manager, you have a little bit of maybe just a bit of coding. At the very least, you understand how a code base is structured. You understand how to, in a high agency way, you understand how to spec requirements in terms of tasks and priorities. You're probably the clearest on priorities of anyone in the organization. And you're both technical and articulate enough to get AI to do your bidding better than either pure business person or even better than an engineer in some cases. So I actually think PMs are making a huge comeback. If I had to summarize this hot take, I think we're going to have a new role or function called product builder that just encompasses a lot of that skill set. And that's going to be one of the best, most fun jobs in this industry in the next few years.
I absolutely love your hot take, Michael. I want to say, as a PM, it was always an uphill battle getting engineers to build what I wanted. But now I don't have to go talk to a real human engineer.
That's every PM's dream. Right? Why do you need the engineers? Just get it done.
Yeah, exactly. It's every PM's dream that is coming true now. And what good way to end this than to say, long live PMs.
Let's go.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Michael. This was such a joy talking to you today.
This was a great conversation. Great talking to you, Vidya. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Do let me know if you enjoyed that episode. And if you want me to interview any specific people or cover other topics, I would absolutely love to hear from you. And please do subscribe, review, and do all that good stuff. And until next time, see ya.